I want to start by saying that I am not a paranoid person. I have never been the kind of neighbor who watches the street from behind curtains or keeps a mental log of who comes and goes at what hour. I mind my own business. I always have. My wife Rachel would tell you the same thing about herself. We are ordinary people who bought an ordinary house on an ordinary street and expected to live there without incident for as long as the mortgage lasted. What happened to us over the course of 3 years was not something either of us could have anticipated, and the reason it went on as long as it did was precisely because it was designed to be invisible. His name was Donald Marsh. He moved in next door 14 months after we did. He was in his mid-50s, lived alone, drove a dark green sedan that was always clean, and kept his property in the kind of meticulous order that initially reads as pride of ownership and later, once you know what you know, reads as something else entirely. He introduced himself the day he moved in, came to the door with a brief, formal handshake and told us his name and said he was glad to be in the neighborhood. He did not make eye contact for more than a second at a time. I remember thinking he was shy. I remember thinking it would take him a while to warm up, and that was fine because we were not looking for a best friend next door, just someone who paid their dues to the HOA and did not park across our driveway. We barely spoke for the first year. He nodded when we passed on the street. He waved occasionally from his driveway. Once, when a storm brought down a branch that landed partly on his side of the property line, he knocked on our door and asked politely if he could trim the source branch on our side, and I said of course, and he thanked me, and that was the extent of our interaction for 12 months. Quiet, private, self-contained. I did not think about him much. The first thing I noticed was the cameras. He had installed exterior cameras, which is not unusual and not by itself a cause for concern. Many people in the neighborhood had them. But Donald's cameras were not positioned the way most people position exterior cameras, angled toward their own entry points, focused on their own property. His were positioned differently. I noticed it first on a Saturday morning when I was washing my car in the driveway and happened to glance at his roofline. The camera mounted at the corner of his house was not pointed at his front door. It was pointed at mine. I stood and looked at it for a moment and then looked away and kept washing the car because I told myself I was probably wrong about the angle, that it was an optical illusion from where I was standing, that cameras at roofline level have wide angles and his probably captured his own property primarily and mine incidentally. I told Rachel that evening. She said she had noticed something similar on the side of the house that faced our backyard but had assumed the same thing I had, that it was incidental overlap. We agreed it was probably nothing and moved on. 3 months later our daughter came home from school and told us that Mr. Marsh had waved at her from his front window as she was walking up our driveway. She was 9 years old at the time. She said it in the neutral, matter-of-fact way children report things that have not yet registered as significant, and I responded in kind, saying that was nice of him and asking about her day. But I went to the front window after dinner and looked at Donald's house and thought about the angle of his cameras and the fact that he had been watching the driveway at the exact moment my daughter arrived home from school, and I felt something that I did not yet have enough information to name but that I recognized as important. I started paying attention. Over the following 2 months I made a point of noting, without making it obvious that I was noting, where Donald was and what he appeared to be observing when I happened to see him. He was in his front window often, positioned back from the glass so that at a casual glance the room appeared empty. He was outside at intervals that seemed to correspond with activity on our side of the property, when Rachel left for work in the morning, when our daughter got home from school, when I came out to the yard on weekends. He had added a second camera to the side of his house, lower than the first, positioned at approximately the height of a backyard fence and aimed directly into our outdoor space. I photographed it from an angle that made it visible and sent the photo to a friend of mine named Greg who works in security installation. I asked him what he thought about the camera angle. He texted back within an hour and said that camera was not covering any part of Donald's property. He said wherever it was pointed, it was not at the person who owned it. I called a non-emergency police line that evening and described what I had observed. The officer I spoke with was polite and not dismissive but explained that exterior cameras aimed at a neighbor's property were not in themselves illegal in my state and that without evidence of a specific crime there was not much they could act on. He suggested I document what I was observing and call back if anything escalated. I thanked him and hung up and sat with the frustration of being told that a man who was clearly watching my family in a deliberate and systematic way was not doing anything actionable. I spoke to 2 other neighbors that week. The first was a woman named Helen who lived 3 houses down and had been on the street longer than anyone. She listened to what I described carefully and then told me something that recalibrated everything. She said she had noticed Donald's cameras early on and had thought what I had thought at first. But she had also noticed something else over the past year that she had not known what to do with. She said that twice, when she had been out walking her dog early in the morning, she had seen a light in Donald's front room that moved in the way a screen moves, back and forth, like someone cycling through images or video. She said she had seen him sitting in front of it both times and that something about how fixed and absorbed he appeared had unsettled her. She had not connected it to the cameras until I brought them up. Once she made the connection, she went quiet for a moment and said she wished she had said something sooner. The second neighbor I spoke with was a man named Carl who lived directly across the street from Donald. Carl was direct and practical, and when I described the camera angles, he walked out to his driveway right then and spent 5 minutes looking at Donald's house from different angles before he came back and said he had never noticed, but now that I pointed it out he could see exactly what I was describing. Carl said he had 2 kids of his own and that if I was moving forward with this he was in. Over the following 3 weeks, the 3 of us, me, Helen, and Carl, compiled documentation. We photographed the cameras from positions that made their angles undeniable. We noted dates and approximate times when Donald appeared to be actively monitoring the street. I installed my own exterior cameras, legal ones aimed at my own property, and within 4 days had footage that showed Donald standing at his window at 6:40 in the morning watching Rachel leave for work, and again at 3:15 in the afternoon watching our daughter walk up the driveway. The footage did not capture him doing anything overtly criminal, but it showed a sustained and deliberate pattern of observation that was undeniable when viewed as a sequence. I brought everything to a different police contact this time, not the non-emergency line but a detective that Carl knew through a mutual acquaintance. His name was Detective Reyes. He looked through what we had compiled and asked a number of specific questions about the camera angles, the timeline, and the specific incidents Helen had described with the screen light. Then he said he wanted to bring in someone from their digital crimes unit to look at the technical aspects of the camera positioning. He said he was not making any promises but that what we had was more substantive than most neighbor complaints he received and that he wanted to evaluate it properly. The digital crimes detective came 2 days later, a woman named Patterson who did not say much but looked at everything carefully and spent a long time studying the photographs of the cameras before she asked me if I had any additional images from different angles. I gave her everything I had. She said she would be in touch. 2 weeks passed. I heard nothing and was beginning to accept that this was going to stall in the way these things stall when Helen is not taken seriously and Carl starts to doubt whether it is worth the friction of living next door to someone you have implicitly accused. And then Detective Reyes called me on a Tuesday evening and said he had some developments and asked if I had time to meet the following morning. The meeting was at a coffee shop, not the station. Reyes came with Patterson. They told me that based on the documentation we had provided and additional investigation they had conducted, they had obtained a warrant. They were executing it the following day. They could not tell me the specifics of what had led them from our documentation to a warrant, but they said the documentation had been the starting point and that it had led them to other information. Patterson said very little in the meeting, but when she did speak she said that I should be prepared for the possibility that what they found would be more extensive than what I was currently imagining. I asked her what that meant. She said she could not be more specific at this point and that I would be informed of any developments that directly involved my family. They went in the next morning at 7:15. I saw the vehicles from my front window. 3 unmarked cars and a van. 6 people in total went into the house. They were inside for 4 hours. Donald was brought out in handcuffs at approximately 9:30 and placed in one of the unmarked vehicles. He did not look at my house as they walked him out. He looked straight ahead with the fixed, flat expression of someone who had already decided how they were going to conduct themselves and was executing that decision. Rachel was at work. I called her and told her what was happening. She left immediately and was home within 40 minutes. We stood in the kitchen and watched through the side window as people in gloves moved back and forth between the house and the van, carrying equipment in cases and boxes in evidence bags. Our daughter was at school. We had agreed she did not need to know the details of what was happening until we understood them ourselves. Reyes came to our door at 11:30. He came alone, without Patterson, and I understood from that fact that what he was about to tell us was something he wanted to deliver personally rather than procedurally. He asked to come in. We sat at the kitchen table and he put his hands flat on the surface in front of him and said he was going to tell us what he could within the constraints of an active investigation. He told us they had found multiple hard drives in the house. The total storage capacity across the drives was significant. He said the number and I heard it, but it did not fully land in that moment the way it landed later when I repeated it to myself several times. He said the drives contained video files. He said the files included footage of our property, including interior footage. I heard the word interior and something happened to my perception of the room I was sitting in. Rachel put her hand on my arm. Reyes explained as much as he could. The exterior cameras had been part of it but not all of it. Donald had obtained interior access through methods that Patterson's unit was still fully analyzing, but that appeared to include devices placed during periods of entry that they were still establishing the timeline for. There was footage of our kitchen, our living room, our daughter's bedroom. He said the footage spanned a period of approximately 2 years and 8 months. He said our family was not the only family represented in the files. He said there were files connected to at least 4 other addresses on the street and several addresses from a previous neighborhood where Donald had lived before moving to ours. Rachel did not say anything for a long time after Reyes finished. I asked him how he had gotten into the house. Reyes said they were still determining the full methodology, but that there were periods in the footage that appeared to correspond with times we had been away, including a long weekend we had taken the previous summer, and that entry during absences was the likely primary method. I thought about that long weekend. We had come home and found everything exactly as we had left it. I had not checked for anything because there had been nothing that suggested I should. After Reyes left, we sat in that kitchen for a very long time. Rachel eventually said she did not want to be in the house. We went to a hotel that night and the night after, and on the third day a forensic team that the department had arranged came and conducted a sweep of our house. They found 2 devices. One in the kitchen area, one in the hallway outside our daughter's room. The devices were removed and documented. We were told the entry points they had been placed through and given information about how to secure them. We told our daughter as much as she needed to know without telling her everything. We told her that a man who had been doing something wrong had been caught by the police and that our house was being checked to make sure everything was safe. She asked if it was Mr. Marsh. Children notice more than we account for. We said yes. She said she had never liked the way he waved at her. I hugged her for a long time and did not say anything. The legal process that followed was lengthy, and I am not going to walk through every procedural step because that is not what this story is about. Donald Marsh was charged on multiple counts. The charges included unlawful surveillance, unlawful entry, and additional charges relating to the content found on the drives that I will not describe specifically, except to say that the footage of my daughter's bedroom was sufficient grounds for charges that carried consequences beyond the surveillance charges alone. He retained an attorney and entered a not guilty plea that was later renegotiated. The case did not go to trial. He entered a plea agreement that included a significant prison sentence and mandatory registration requirements that would follow him for the rest of his life. The other families on the street were notified by the department. There were 5 of us in total, counting my family and Helen and Carl, which meant 2 additional families we had not known were involved until the department made contact. One of those families had a teenage daughter whose room had also been surveilled. I did not know them well, but I knew them by sight, and I saw them one evening a week after they had been notified, and the way they moved and spoke to each other and did not fully meet my eyes told me everything I needed to know about where they were in processing it. I nodded at them from across the driveway and they nodded back. There was nothing useful I could say. Rachel and I spent a significant amount of the following year in conversations that I would not have predicted needing to have. Not with each other, we talked to each other constantly, more than we had in years, and that part was not what I expected. The conversations I did not predict were the ones with ourselves, individually, about what it means to have your private life observed without your knowledge for nearly 3 years. There is a particular kind of violation in that, different from what I had imagined violation would feel like before it happened to me. It is not dramatic in the way intrusion feels dramatic in the movies. It is quiet and it is persistent and it lives in the ordinary moments, making breakfast, arguing about something minor, sitting on the couch on a Sunday afternoon, because those are the moments you now know were not only yours. The ordinariness of private life is the thing that makes it private, and when that ordinariness has been recorded and reviewed by someone with intentions you do not want to think about for too long, the ordinariness does not feel safe anymore in the way it used to. We stayed in the house. That was a decision we made deliberately after considering leaving and deciding that leaving felt like something being taken from us by someone who had already taken enough. We repainted the interior the following spring. Not because it needed it, because it was something we chose and did, and the house looked different afterward in a way that was ours. Rachel planted things in the backyard that summer, more than she had ever planted before, and by August it looked nothing like it had looked the previous year, and that was exactly what she wanted. Helen moved the following spring. She told me she had been thinking about it for a long time before any of this happened and that this had clarified the decision. She sold the house in 3 weeks and was gone in 6, and on the last morning she stopped by with a bottle of wine and said she was glad we had talked and that she did not think any of the rest of it would have happened the way it did if we had not compared notes when we did. I told her I agreed with that completely. Carl is still across the street. We waved to each other with the specific warmth of 2 people who went through something together and came out of it knowing each other better than they otherwise would have. Donald Marsh is in prison. He will be there for a period of time that I know and that I choose not to specify here. The registration requirements that attach to him after his release are permanent. Whatever version of ordinary life he recovers after this, it will not be anonymous. It will not be invisible. Every move he makes in proximity to any community will be documented and known and available to every neighbor he will ever have. That fact does not fully resolve anything, but it is not nothing. What I want to say, to anyone who has read this far and is now looking at their own neighborhood with slightly different eyes, is that I am not telling this story to make you paranoid. Most people are not Donald Marsh. Most quiet neighbors are just quiet. Most cameras are aimed where their owners say they are aimed. The world is not full of this, and you should not move through it as if it is. But I want to say something about the moment when I stood in my driveway and noticed the camera angle and told myself I was probably wrong about it. I want to say something about the months between that moment and the moment I finally made the call. I was not wrong about it. I knew I was not wrong about it. I talked myself out of trusting what I could see clearly because making the call felt like an overreaction, and because I did not want to be the person on the street who caused a problem over something that might be nothing. It was not nothing. If something is wrong in the visible world around you, the part you can see and photograph and describe to someone else in clear and specific terms, trust that. Make the call. Document what you can and make the call. The worst outcome of being wrong is a slightly awkward conversation with a neighbor who has bad camera placement. The worst outcome of not making the call is 3 years of footage on a hard drive in a house you can see from your kitchen window. Make the call.